Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and thank you, Ken, for that overstated introduction. Given the success which Russia had in running its economy, I'm not sure how much credence I should give to that compliment. At any rate, it is an excellent introduction, because what I do want to talk about tonight, I shouldn't say tonight, it's this noon. What I do want to, it's dark here and all those lights. What I do want to talk about is the largest socialist enterprise in the United States, next perhaps to the military, although I think that's a temporary case. I think as the military is being cut down, our national school system, our educational system, will shortly become the largest socialist enterprise in the United States. 90% of all children attend what are misleadingly called public, but really should be called government schools. The word public is very misleading. Stanford is a private university, Berkeley is a public university, but there's no relevant sense in which one is more public than the other. One is governmental and the other is private. Our educational system is a socialist enterprise. Moreover, there is one thing about that educational system that no one denies. It has been failing very badly. We have a typical example of what happens when you have a socialist industry. In any socialist, large-scale socialist enterprise, you have the situation that the more you spend, the less you get. More input, less output. In the past 30 years, total government spending per pupil has tripled after allowing for inflation in real terms. Is there anybody in this room who will say that the output of the educational system has gone up rather than down? I doubt it. Performances on SAT tests, on these international comparisons, take whatever standard you want. Our educational system has been performing badly, producing less education rather than more. Why? For the same reason, exactly the same reason, that Russia collapsed. Socialism is a very inefficient, ineffective method of running an enterprise, whether that enterprise be to produce cars, or meatloaf, or bread, or school, or education. A socialist enterprise has certain very common characteristics which apply to all our socialist enterprises. I may say, while schooling, at the moment, education, it may be the largest socialist enterprise, it's by no means the only one. But if we let's stick to schooling for a moment, or to every socialist enterprise has the following characteristics. Number one, it's extremely costly. All comparisons that have been made about running any activity through government or running it through the private enterprise system tend to suggest that on the average it costs twice as much to do anything through government as it does through the private system. There was at one time a very broad international study of bus systems, of just taking people on a bus, comparing privately owned and governmentally owned bus systems. And the answer was twice as expensive. If you take, when the government ran it, if you take our own school system, we have private schools, and if you pick schools that appeal to the same social and economic class, on the average, it costs half as much in a private school as it does in a governmental school, and you get better quality for that expenditure. So all socialist enterprises are high cost, inefficient, and produce, on the average, a low quality product. That surely describes the American educational system. But socialist enterprises have another characteristic. There are some groups that benefit very much from socialist enterprises. That's why it's so hard to get rid of them. There are some groups that profit from them. They are small, and in general, they are the privileged groups in the society. On the other hand, there are very large groups that suffer from them, and those are in general the poorer and less advantaged in the society. Well, now let's apply that analogy to our educational system. Who profits from our present socialist system? I'm going to start by naming one group that you will be surprised to hear me name. Those are our high-income people in the United States, people who live in the high-income suburbs. For them, the government school system is a tax shelter. Where are there really good schools in the United States in the so-called public school system? In the high-income suburbs, in places like Scarsdale and Flossmoor and Marin County. And why do I say they're a tax shelter? If the people who live in those communities were to send their children to private schools of comparable quality, the tuition they paid would not be deductible in calculating their federal income tax. If instead they erect what is essentially a private school in their local community, and they pay for it in the form of high local taxes, those taxes are deductible in computing their federal income tax. So as a result, one group that does benefit from our present social system, or thinks it does, because I'm not even sure they're right, if they really had competition in schooling, they could probably get the same quality at a low enough cost to pay them back their tax savings. But they are one group. Another group are obviously the bureaucrats who administer the system and the teachers' unions, the officials of the teachers' unions, not the teachers, but the officials of the teachers' union. And still another group, politicians, who are not employed by the system, but who benefit from it by having political clout as a result of the existence of the system. I'll come back to that in a moment in a slightly different connection. Who are the ones who are harmed? The lowest income people in the country. Where are our schools worst? Of poorest quality? In the slums, in the poorer areas of our society, in the Wattses, in the Harlems. There is no respect in which a disadvantaged person in the United States is so disadvantaged as with respect to the kind of schooling he can get for his child. If he has enough money, he can buy the same car as anybody else. But even if he has enough money to pay for tuition at a fine private school, he can't afford to do it because he has to live there. He has to have some other way of getting there. The only way he can get good schooling for his child is by moving to one of these high-income suburbs, and he can't afford to do it. They are captives. And if any of you have ever visited a government school in such an area, you cannot come away without feeling absolutely shocked at what we're doing to our children. I remember visiting a government school in Boston some 10 years ago when we were filming for our Free to Choose program. And you came into this school through these detectors, these metal detectors. Kids had to enter through metal detectors to see whether they had guns or knives on them. And there were policemen standing there to pat them down shortly thereafter. The windows were broken and all the windows were covered with wire mesh. The students were paying little attention. It was a disgrace. It was a place to keep kids off the streets for a few hours, not to school them in anything. And the parents didn't like it. I talked to numbers of parents, and they were devastated by what they had to do here. The teachers who were teaching there didn't like it. Nobody was benefiting from that, and yet the cost per pupil in that school was as high as in a government school in a neighboring suburb which had a fine swimming pool and fine facilities, because so much money had to be being spent for security in the government school that there wasn't enough money left for decent teaching and decent performance. What's the solution? There is only, in my opinion, one solution to any socialist enterprise. Whether it's a U.S. post office, whether it's the Russian enterprises and whether it's a school system. Privatize, privatize, privatize. How do we privatize the school system? Very simply. Those of us in the upper income groups have always had the freedom to choose where to send our children to school, because many of us could afford to pay twice for schooling. Once through the taxes that we're going to pay for the state school system, once by paying tuition. Let's have every parent in the United States have that choice. Let's give every parent in the United States the opportunity to select the school to which he or she wants his or her children to go. How can we do that? By taking the money that we are now wasting in our inefficient socialist school system and giving control over it to the people who are really concerned about the quality of schooling they get, namely the parents. This is a system that I proposed over 30 years ago under the name of the voucher system. If I were proposing it today, I think I'd give it a different name. I'd call it a tax refund system. Because what I was saying is, here, suppose a parent takes his child out of a government school and sends him to a private school. He reduces the burden on the government because they have one fewer student to school, but he doesn't get anything back from the taxes he's paid. If he takes his child out of the school, shouldn't he be entitled to a refund of the taxes that he's paid for the purpose of schooling? At any rate, it has gotten popular under the term voucher system, and I'll stick to it. Now, a voucher system is a very simple idea. It simply says, if you take your child out of the government school and send him to a private school, to a non-government school, we'll give you back part of the money that we otherwise would have spent in schooling him. In the state of California, on the average, the state is spending $5,200 per year per child in school. The voucher initiative that I am really pushing here, called this initiative measure, which I have a copy of it here, which is being promoted by Excel, the name of the organization that is trying to push the initiative, which is entitled Parental Choice in Education Initiative, provides that any parent who takes his child out of a government school and sends him to a private school will receive not $5,200, but $2,600, half that amount. I'm simplifying because the amount to be received depends on the grade the child is in. It's on a per grade basis. A voucher equal to 50%. And that voucher can be used in any school, private, or for that matter, governmental, provided the governmental school decides to shift to being available for these vouchers. When the system is fully operating, everybody will be better off. The parents of the children who are now in government schools will be better off because they will have a wider choice of schools. The parents of the people who are in private schools now will be better off because after 2 years, and I'll explain that in a moment, they will be entitled to a voucher. And the taxpayer will be better off because the total expenditures on schooling will be less. So it's a win-win situation for everybody except the educational administrator, the Honigs in our state, and the teachers' union, the members of the teachers, the officials of the teachers' unions. They are the only people who will really end up worse off than they are now. But that doesn't. Let me go on to explain the initiative briefly for just one more minute, and then I want to talk about what the problem is in getting it, and then I want to open up the questions. The initiative provides that parents whose children are now in government schools, who take them out and send them to private schools, will receive the voucher beginning in 1993. As soon as the first year it could be in operation after this is adopted. However, those parents whose children are now in private schools will not receive vouchers until 1995. The reason for the delay is to make sure that there is no additional burden put on the taxpayer. By that time, enough people will have left the government schools and gone into the private sector so that the savings to the taxpayers will be ample to finance the vouchers for the fewer than 10% of our kids now who are going to private schools. Now, what assurance do we have that we'll have better schools? Well, let me give you a couple of numbers that are kind of striking. It turns out that in Los Angeles school system, 30% of the school teachers send their children to private schools, compared to 10% of the population at large. In the city of Chicago, in the Chicago public school system, 46% of Chicago public school teachers send their children to private schools, compared to 22% of the population. Now, you would think that the public school teachers would know something about the quality of public schools. And I think you could hardly ask for better evidence of what would happen to quality. Now, let me leave any further items about this particular initiative to your questions. I want to go on to the question of why this seems such an attractive idea. For 30 years I've been trying to sell it, and everybody agrees it's an attractive idea, and we haven't gotten it. Why? I say we haven't gotten it. We do have a very small-scale voucher going in the state of Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, thanks to the initiative and drive of a black legislator by the name of Polly Williams. And that small-scale initiative, I think it's 1,000, 1,500 low-income kids who are entitled to a voucher, has drawn the strenuous opposition of the state teachers union and of the state bureaucracy. They've challenged it in courts. The Supreme Court has taken it to court. So far, it's successfully survived its challenges. But it illustrates both the pros and the cons of it. And it illustrates one other point that I want to bring out. I said before that the people who would benefit most from this are the low-income people in our slums and so on, who for the first time would be able to get a decent school for their child. They know it. There have been numerous public opinion polls on vouchers over the years. In every single one, the group that gives it the most support are the blacks. In Wisconsin, there was a poll of Wisconsin residents found that support, I'm quoting from a Wall Street Journal piece, that support for a voucher system that included private schools is now at 59%, up from 44% in 1988. Support among blacks is an astounding 83%. Now, the fascinating thing about that is that the blacks have always been in favor of it. But with the exception of Polly Williams, not a single major political figure has ever come out in favor of the voucher. Why? That goes back to the point I made earlier. Because they get their political clout out of patronage from the school system. They have something to say about who gets on the school board, something to say about who's the superintendent of the school and so on. So that comes to my final point of why is it that it's been so hard to get it over. And the answer is that you have this small group of vested interests, the educational bureaucracy and the teachers' unions in the main, and some of their colleagues like the State Employees Union, the Union of State Employees and so on, who have in every case been able to defeat a voucher proposal by virtue of being able to round up more money for the purpose and being able at the last minute to put on a big blitz. The latest example was in Oregon, where last year there was a reasonably good voucher initiative on the ballot. 6 months before the election, in polls, a majority of the public supported it. In the last 2 months, month or 2 months before the election, the vested interests revved up their propaganda machine, started putting out major TV advertisements and so on, saying this will destroy the public school system and all the other nonsense that they are capable of generating. They had teachers in government schools send home propaganda against the voucher with their children, with their students. And they ended up defeating the voucher, not by a great margin, but by a substantial margin. Now, I have seen the same thing happen before in Michigan, in New Hampshire, in Connecticut. And there is no assurance it will not happen here in California. Let us suppose this initiative gets on the ballot. It's not something that's going to happen in the future. I already heard on the radio in San Francisco that peerless leader of the legislature. What? Come out and give an impassioned speech about how, give an impassioned statement to TV or radio, I forget which it was, about how this was a terrible idea, this voucher plan. It was going to destroy education. Bill Honig is revving up his propaganda apparatus. The propaganda apparatus succeeded in succoring the California voters to pass his infamous Proposition 98 a year ago. And he'll try it over again. That is a great problem in getting a voucher initiative passed. Now the voucher initiative that is being now proposed is, in my opinion, the best that has ever been proposed. It avoids mistakes in past initiatives. It doesn't have the gimmicks in it that those past initiatives have. It's straightforward, written in plain English. Everybody can read it and understand it. It has something in it for everybody, for the parents in various kinds of schools, for the taxpayers in general, and even for the teachers by an empowerment of teachers point. So I think it's the most attractive voucher initiative so far I've had an opportunity to support. But it will only get passed if there is enough support of it, well enough financed, so we can outspend and outdo the vested interests whom you may be sure will make every possible effort they can to kill it, will appeal to arguments that have no validity but have high propaganda value. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. What we're going to attempt to do now is, I'll try to see you beyond these lights. They are a bit bright, aren't they, Dr. Friedman? Yeah. And I'll try to do justice to the question by repeating it as best I can so that it'll pick up through this microphone. Who will start? Right down here.
Would you address...
Could you stand, please, so people can see?
Would you please address something more general, like what we can do in this country to come out of the recession? Kind of
Could you please address something more general, like how can we come out of this recession?
Yes, that's very easy, because there's nothing very much we can do to help us come out of the recession. And that's not the important issue facing this country. The important issue facing this country is how do we come out from a set of policies which are destined to give us slow or negative growth over the next decade. How do we come out from under Bushonomics? How do we come out from a system in which we've had higher taxes, more regulation, very rapid increases in government spending, which has been, it really isn't involved in the recession or the recovery. It'll be a recovery, but which has in fact reduced our capacity to produce a high standard of life in this country. That's the real problem. And the education problem is not a negligible part of that. You know, government spending on education, as I say, has been very close to total expenditures on the military, and at the moment I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't looked at the last figures. Last time I looked, educational expenditures in total were about close to 90% as high as military expenditures. So we're not talking about a negligible factor. And I think that the doing something about education, let's worry about something we can really do about here in the state of California. We can send all sorts of messages to Washington and they'll get lost by the U.S. Post Office.
Right down here. You, sir? Right.
Salaries and benefits are about 80 to 85%.
What's that?
Salaries and benefits are 80 to 85% of most public education budgets. You said it would cost taxpayers less in a market-driven educational system. Is there merit pay? What's the salary structure for teachers? How does that work?
Salaries and benefits in any educational budget tend to be about 80% or more. How would you tackle that through merit pay?
I don't have to tackle that. The competitive market will tackle it, because if you look at where those salaries are going to, a large fraction of them are going to bureaucrats. If you look at the figures on what has happened to employment in schools nationwide, the category that has grown most rapidly is not the classroom teacher. It's the non-classroom teacher. And not only in the local area, but also in the county, and particularly at the school districts and in the state level. Now, private enterprises can dispense with most of those bureaucratic. How is it, let me just ask you the question in return, how is it that private schools are able to offer better schooling at half the cost? It's not because they underpay their teachers. There's nobody who's forced to teach for them. It is true that in some cases they have been subsidizing that in the Catholic school system, for example. You have had nuns. But we made a detailed comparison when we studied a Catholic school in New York City, in which we priced the nuns at the price that the state was paying, that the city was paying the city school teachers, not at what they actually paid them. They weren't paying them anything. They were essentially in the system as nuns. And we found that after we priced their services at the same price as the city was paying to the school, the cost per child was half as much. Now, let me give you another example. I don't remember the exact figures. Some of you may figure it. But there's been a marvelous comparison between the somebody who was doing a study on schools in New York City called up the city school department and asked, how many people do you have in your bureaucracy? And they said, oh, we don't really know. That's a very hard figure to find out. We'll go, call us back in a week. They called up the Catholic diocese, which serves, I think, about 1/10 as many, or maybe 1/5 as many, a fairly large fraction. And they asked the same question, and the woman who answered says, wait a minute, and I'll count them. So I don't believe that that's the problem. I think in a private school system, as in a private enterprise situation of any kind, the market will determine what people get paid, and the market will see to it that there aren't the kind of hidebound seniority systems that you now have in government schools, that good teachers get paid more and poor teachers get fired. And that's what you want to have happen. But it will not happen unless the real customer, the parent, has something to say about what school he sends his child to.
Right down here. Yeah?
I'm a little bit confused. I'm trying to figure this out. I think the voucher system is a good idea, but I'm wondering in a state like California that the low-income and minority people whose education is being affected so poorly, those people are usually not property owners, and so how would the voucher system work in that sense?
She doesn't understand how a voucher system could work for low-income people in this state who tend not to be property owners.
Well, the property ownership has really nothing to do with this proposal. I mentioned that as a form of saying I would title it a refund. But this is being titled Parental Choice Initiative. And you now have the money currently being spent on schools. A large part of it comes from the state, some part comes from the county, some part comes from the local community. Whatever that total is, on the average for the state as a whole, the parent who takes his child out of school would be entitled to a voucher equal to half that sum, which he or she could spend at any private school, whether he's a property owner or not. So property ownership is irrelevant. I may have misled you by my talking about the refund.
I think where I'm confused is I think that people pay property, when you are a property owner, you pay taxes. Some of those taxes go to education, obviously, in schools, etc. Since I have no children, I'm not quite sure how it works. But anyway, so if I am not a property owner and I'm living in an apartment in Garden Grove, for instance, and I have 2 children in the public school system, would I then be able to, even though I don't pay any property taxes, would I then be able to get a voucher?
Yes. Yes. Your voucher would not be, the possibility of getting a voucher would depend only on your having a child in the public school system. It would not depend on whether you are a property tax payer or not. And you may think that a non-property owner isn't paying taxes for schools, but you'd be wrong.
Toward the back of the room.
Yes, way back there.
Striped regimental tie there, yes. Yes, yes.
One of the issues, I share the same concern that some lady did. The parents are probably the biggest contributor to the increase in educational population in Southern California. Another concern that I had was how do you resolve the fact that public schools must take all comers? And if you allow a voucher system for parents to care and then move private schools, then all you're left is the 3 sigma losers.
I'm sorry. You want to?
How do you resolve the fact that the public school system must take all comers, basically?
Well, first of all, I think it's a mistake that the government school system isn't entitled to expel troublemakers and get rid of them. I don't think it's a virtue of the government school system that they enable the schooling of 9/10 of their children to be destroyed by 1/10 who come in with guns and knives. But in any event, there will be, if people have money, how do you make sure that there are enough restaurants to serve all of them? Is that a real problem? Should government go into the business of running restaurants in order to be sure that there will be some place where anybody can go? We do for poor people, and we have food stamps for them. But why do we give food stamps to everybody? Do you get a food stamp in here? It's absurd. The same thing is true with the school system. If, in this case, by giving everybody a voucher, every parent will have enough money to buy a schooling for his child. Some parents will want to add some money to it and buy better schooling. But in any event, the private enterprise system will see to it that there are enough schools available of a wide enough variety so that everybody will find a school system to it. That is, if you ultimately phased out the whole government school system, which would be the best solution of all, there would be a school for everybody, just as there's a restaurant for everybody if he has the money to spend. It's no different. Moreover, the government school says, oh no, we'll be terrible. Schools if you take out all the cream. But if they're providing the kind of quality schooling they claim, why won't they attract the cream? They are admitting that they can't do a good job. That's what they're saying. I believe them.
I think we have time for one more question, and I see the hand of one of your former students, Professor Friedman, Jim Doty from Chapman University.
Oh, Jim. Hi, Jim.
Professor Friedman, would you recommend extending your voucher system to higher education?
I'll be very glad to talk about that, but I'm not sure. You know my answer, but I'm not sure you'll like it. I believe that one of the most disgraceful programs we have in this country is the government subsidization of higher education. I am in favor, as an ideal, of eliminating all government subsidization of higher education. It's unquestionably the government program which is most regressive. As I put it when I'm being in my demagogic mood, we tax the people in Watts to send the children from Beverly Hills to college. And that's a literal fact. However, we do have a government school system. And what I have proposed for higher education is a variant of the voucher system. What I have proposed is that if the state of California wants to spend X billion dollars on higher, so-called higher schooling, not higher education, most of it isn't education. If the government of California wants to spend X billion dollars on higher schooling, it should decide how much it's going to spend per child, $10,000 or whatever it is, divide that number into it and decide how many individuals that is, if it's 1 million, 2 million, whatever it is, and offer that number of scholarships on a merit basis, which can be used at any school, government or private, in the state of California or outside the state of California. And that would be, in my opinion, a much better system for assuring a high quality of higher education as well. And we have, to some extent, there is an element of that today in California, in which people, California residents who attend another California school, a non-government California school, are able to get, I don't know, Jim knows much better than I do, but there are quite a number of, there is a program whereby they can get vouchers or the equivalent. Before I close and get off, I do want to call to your attention to the fact that the group that has been formed to promote the voucher is called EXCEL, E-X-C-E-L, Excellence Through Choice in Education League. And several of the people from EXCEL are here in your audience. I want to mention their names and suggest that anybody of you, any one of you who is more interested in getting involved in this, and I hope you all will, may want to see Kevin Teasley, who's right over here, Sean Steele, who's somewhere there. Will you stand up, please? Back there. And Steve Gaffant. Where's he? Over there. At the back, 2 at the back of the room and 1 at the front of the room. So I hope you will get in touch with them and give them your card or something, and they'll send you the appropriate propaganda material. Thank you.
We'd like to make one little presentation here before you all go. Dr. Friedman, thanks very much. Thanks for putting up with the awkwardness with which I repeated those questions. I'd like to thank C-SPAN for being here today, and you can check your listings to see when this will be repeated or broadcast. And I hope we preserved our nonpartisan status, Monica. But Brian Murphy has a presentation.
We are certainly still nonprofit, for sure. Professor Friedman.
But you're nonpartisan. I wasn't partisan, I assure you. Plague on both their houses.
Please accept it. Please accept this memento as for our appreciation of your being here and keeping Orange County informed through our Orange County Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Milton Friedman. As I close the luncheon, I'd like to thank all of you. Please remind you all to drive safely on the way home. And I would like to remind you as you're walking out, our next meeting is February the 27th with the Secretary of State of California Resource Agencies, Douglas Wheeler, and then on March the 12th, Dale Hansen, Chief Executive Officer of CalPERS. So please join us again in the future. Thank you.